In 1720, Giovanni Battista Piranesi was born in Venice. He moved to Rome when he was 20 years old and studied printmaking. At the time, the Grand Tour was a coming-of-age tradition among young men in upper-class Europe. They would come to Italy and Greece for explorations and private tuitions on history, law, and architecture. Many of them were keen to collect prints of Roman cities and landscapes, which prompted artists to develop ways to produce cityscape images, or venduta. There were quite a few famous venduta artists at the time. Canaletto, whom we mentioned in a previous video about Somerset House, was famous for his use of atmospheric effect and his depiction of grand architecture. Another popular artist was Giovanni Panini. He was the first vendutist that painted ancient ruins. The solemn nature of ruins quickly caught up, and artists started to add imaginary elements to these sites. Some took even one step further and added other sceneries and architecture elsewhere into the composition. The images became more and more extravagant and fantastical. Hence, people came up with the term capriccio to describe it. Coming back to Piranesi, he was captivated by Roman architecture early on. The first collection he worked on was 12 prints of imaginary temples, palaces, ruins, and prisons. This early work gave him a solid grasp on storytelling through immersive dimensions, extravagant details, and dramatic chiaroscuro. In 1748, when he was 28 years old, Piranesi opened his own workshop in Rome, and by 1750, he released the first edition of Imaginary Prison. The edition contained 14 plates, depicting a completely fictional architectural setting of grand underground dungeons. The most notable character is the sheer size of the dungeon, especially from the staffage. We can barely read their profile, but it's clear that these figures are overwhelmed by the surroundings. The composition across the entire collection is diverse. There are zoomed-in depictions of a sculpture or a plate. It also contained more zoomed-out, holistic view from the ground looking up towards the multiple sets of staircases and arcades. We see interior shots with a sense of heaviness and obscurity. We see exterior shots with a murky sky. The artist used windows multiple times to frame the views. Like here, we're looking through a medieval window to the outside. Or here, our view is framed by an arch into an interior chamber. Looking at so many prints at the same time makes us naturally wonder, how big is this space? Where do the stairs end? And what is beyond these arches? Compared with his previous work, this collection is more exploratory, more sketchy. The line works were vague and the shadows were less definitive. The background scene faded quickly, and the edges of architecture were raw. It's clear that the artist was contemplative about the subject. In terms of lighting, most of the scenes he depicted were underground, hence it is hard to tell where the light actually comes from. He also seemed to use a lot of smoke or fog in these images. The diffuse light creates a mysterious appeal, and at the same time, it makes you wonder what is creating all this smoke. Are the people here brewing potions? Or are they putting out a fire? And what we're seeing is the beginning of how this fire will destroy the whole place. When observing the architecture in the set closely, there are a lot of stairs and arches, like we mentioned. But there are also a lot of drawbridges, gargoyles, and pulleys. Not only do they usually belong to the outside rather than the interior, you can also see many of these elements are geometrically impossible. These stairs are way too steep. This platform goes to nowhere. And how do you even get from this bridge to the ground? Our mind picks up this misalignment before we actually realize it, and they plant questions into our mind, making us more intrigued than mesmerized. The human figures all seem like they're going somewhere, or they're caught doing certain things, as if we're just getting a glimpse into their existence. This snapshot appearance and the fuzzy profile makes us wonder who they are and where they're going. And of course, we'll never get the answer. 11 years after the first edition, Piranesi went back to this etching idea and released a second edition with 2 additional pieces. Compared to the first, sketchier version, the latter 16 prints gained a lot more development on multiple fronts. The most significant is the added dimensionality. Even though the original design has many elements with strong directional implications, in the new edition, he went one step ahead and added additional stairs, handrail, corners, vaults to intensify both orthogonal and traversal lines. He also made the scenes more full, first by adding details such as these hanging ropes and metal chains. Second, he gave a lot more texture to the existing elements such as stones, this wood, and the detail of the steam, and almost everything that we see. As an example, this is a relatively simple composition from the entire set. In the original drawing, the foreground is a stone window with an allure in the middle ground and a plaza with a curved building and a tower in the background. Building on this foundation, in the second version, we see Piranesi doing a few things to increase the complexity. First, he added details to the first 2 layers. On the foreground, he added this chain again coming down the 2 sides of the window. He also added this ballista in the corner. In the middle ground, he multiplied the lamppost and added both railing and more people into the allure. Perhaps more prominent than the elements mentioned above, Piranesi added more components to the print. First, we see this wood beam going beyond the border of the image. We also see this additional arch outside of the window. We see this passageway between the arch abutment and somewhere again beyond the image. This platform in the rise of the arch is new also. He also added this turning wheel, certainly contributing to this mysterious and whimsical nature of the image. In terms of shading, you also start to see a more delicate application. Even the darkest part of the print, the foreground, has a more varied shade of dark, and the edges of each stone is a lot more defined. On the other hand, however, in the original print, the relief on the wall was a lot more defined. Yet in the newer version, Piranesi made it blurry. Such a differentiation is not accidental. It gives the image further dimensionality and depth. Those walls appear further away from us. Another example here is the sky. The artist completely removed the shading of the sky at its furthest point, which truly allows the print a full range of shade from the darkest to the lightest. Let's look at another example. In the original version of drawbridge, we see an ambitious attempt to use these drawbridges to create a visual direction in the composition. We also see the usage of staffage to illustrate the vastness of the architecture. But in a further version, Piranesi added this completely new pathway and changed the visual composition completely. Now the first thing the viewer sees is this wooden bridge connecting the stone platform on the right to somewhere on the left that requires our imagination. Even the spiral staircase here, around the tower before, now wraps around this wooden bridge. This spiral staircase really brings together all the straight lines around it. And again, as we've seen before, more details about the architecture and staffage was added, and the range of shade is deepened. Imaginary Prison ended up being the most influential work of Piranesi, as it inspires generations of artists from many disciplines. The Endless Staircase inspired Escher's Impossible Construction. The Oppressing Dungeon inspired The Pit and the Pendulum by Allan Poe. The Vault and Arches inspired the original Bank of England building. Some say the never-ending allure is because the imaginary prison Piranesi depicted reminded us of our own human brain. They are both labyrinthian and unexpectable, dark and complex. The viewers can almost recognize themselves through these pictures.